All right, so the basic equation of a circle is going to be where you're going to have two bubbles squared, one bubble for x and one bubble for y. And so you have x plus some number, and you're going to have y plus some number inside these bubbles. And then that's going to always equal the radius squared. And this comes from the distance formula, as you've seen in class. I need to make a change because that h with the y needs to be a k, because it's not going to be the same number, it's going to be its own number. Now, as far as graphing goes, if you remember when we talked about transformation transformation of graphs, when we had that that value inside the bubble with the x, this number told you how to move left or right, and if it was positive, it moved left, and if it was negative, it moved right. Same thing's going on here. And once again, it comes to that idea of if it's in the bubble and you set it equal to 0 and you solve, you would subtract it over, and so it'd be a minus. So the same idea. So if it's with the x, this number is going to move it left or right, because that's how the x-axis goes, and it's going to move it the opposite of what it says here. Over here, we've got the y value. It's in a bubble with the y, so once again, it's going to be the opposite. And y goes up and down, so this value right here that brings you up or down, and depending on what this says, it's going to be the opposite. So let's look at an example. Let's say I have x minus 1 squared plus y plus 2 squared equals 9. And I want to graph that. And so I first get my xy axis on there, and I'm going to graph the center of the circle. That's actually what these values right here are telling me is the center of the circle. And so I see a plus or a minus 1 in here with the x. So that's going left or right, but because it's minus, it's going to go right, so it goes the opposite. And then and the y, that's up or down, I have a plus 2, and so that's going to be the opposite also, so it's going to be at negative 2. And so this is going to be the center of my circle. If I want to write that point with coordinates, I would write a positive 1 and a negative 2. Okay, once again, it's like if you set this equal to 0 and you solved it, what would you get? All right, and then as far as the radius goes, remember this is the radius squared. So in order to figure out what the radius is I'm going to have to square root it. So I square root the 9 and I get 3. So that means from the center here, I need to go 1, 2, 3 to the right. That's going to be a point on the circle. I could go 3 to the left. That's going to be a point on the circle. I could go 3 up. That would be a point on the circle. And I could go 3 down, and that would be a point on the circle. And I could go 3 counterclockwise. You know, you get the idea. Okay, I usually just do the 4 left, right, up, down. And then from there, I can graph my circle. Try your best to graph a nice circle. This is horrible. It's hard to do on the iPad. But this would be the circle, the graph of that circle. Okay, you can also look if you have a graph already and you're trying to find the equation. You first just want to identify what is this point right here. Okay, so because that point is positive 1, negative 2, then my equation is going to be the opposite. So I'm going to have x, and then because it's a positive 1, I'll subtract. And then for the y, because it's a negative 2, I'll add. And then you want to count 1, 2, 3 over, so this will be 3 squared, which is 9. And that's how you can come up with your equation. If I just told you, so let's say I just told you that the center was 2, 4, and the radius is 3. Okay, then what is my equation going to be? Well, once again, I just set up my structure. I have a bubble for the x and squared, and a bubble for the y and squared equals. And so then I go, okay, well, the x value is 2, so I'm going to put a minus 2 here. Remember, it's the opposite. The y value is 4, so I'm going to do a minus 4. It's the opposite. And then r is 3, but I need to square that, so that's going to be 9. So there's your equation. Now on these, you'll see that the x and y are here. You know, those are always there, but sometimes, just like when you're finding the equation of a line, sometimes you have to use them as a hint. So let's look at a little bit of a tougher problem here. Okay, so let's change it up a little bit. It gets a little bit more difficult. Let's say that your center is at -1, 4, and you have a point on your circle at 2, 3. It's always a good idea to see what this looks like. So let's just kind of get a little glimpse of this. So your center is at -1, 4. So that's the center of your circle. And then for one of the points on the circle, you have 2, 3. So what that means is you have a radius right here, and this goes around to form a circle. And I'm not going to be able to draw it very good, so we're getting kind of a choppy view here. All right, but there's your point right there on the circle. And you still need to come up with the equation of this. Now, again, the equation goes like this, right? So we have the center, so I can actually write that part of it. So it'd be x plus 1 because it's the opposite, and y minus 4 because it's the opposite. And then I still need to figure out the radius. And that's where your point comes in. If you remember when you graphed lines, sometimes you'd use a temporary solution to plug in for the x and the y, so that you can have fewer variables in your equation and actually solve it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 2 there, and I'm going to put a 3 there. So I plug in for x and y, and then I'm going to do the math. So 2 plus 1, that's 3, and that'll be squared. 3 minus 4, that's -1, and that'll be squared. And notice I used a bubble because I have a negative, so I wanted to put that in the bubble and get that squared also. Now I do the math. 3 squared is 9, 1 squared is 1, equals r squared. 9 plus 1, that's 10, so 10 equals r squared. Now if I wanted to know what r was, I would square root the 10. But if all I'm doing is writing the equation of the circle, I really don't need to do that, because if you look on the equation, that is r squared. So that is just going to be a 10. So that means if I rewrite this, my equation is going to be x plus 1 squared, so I'm looking here at what I did before, plus y minus 4 squared equals, and then r squared is 10. If I just want to know r, that's when I would square root it. And so there's my equation for this one.